say that the reason we decided to take a little break was because I failed to plug my laptop in. And I mean, could you agree that it does look like it did
looked
look
like
like
it was plugged in.
plugged
No,
in, right?
it's
It's
for
plugged
sure.
in, and here it's on the laptop side, it's plugged in, and there was a cord that ran to the wall, and I had just put the wrong plug in. So
It's
definitely operator error. I'll put this down to me continuing in my ongoing project to fully adult.
Oh, but then you wouldn't be nearly as much fun.
I know. Childlike fun.
Boring.
Yes, childlike fun is definitely what you want to have on the resume, for a person who you want to work with and trust with our nation's technical health information architecture. I'm surprised some people listen to me at all sometimes. Anyways, so we're having a fascinating discussion about life and what parts of DC to live when we found out that we were going to be able to turn the laptop back on. So I think the marker point was administration apps.
Concerns about data flowing outside of the healthcare system. So I think when we talked about sort of priorities 1 and concerns 1 and 2, those were bucketed around delivery of care, Planned Parenthood clinics.
Yeah.
What happens when you seek care outside of a state and the data is flowing anyway. So the third bucket is really about what consumers do on their own and their online behaviors, searching for information about where to get a safe and legal abortion, searching about how to get a medication abortion, searching location data when you travel somewhere. Period tracking apps was another one that we mentioned. Routine questions about menstrual cycle that get collected sometimes in an educational context for what reason.
Well, and female athletes, being asked to submit their menstruation cycles.
I'm not even sure that for the scientific basis for that. That feels like an old, maybe based on some old myths about athletic performance while
I think
menstruating.
That's based on. Well, I think it's actually based on it's the whole trans fears. Someone's not a real woman for a sports purpose. So I think it's one of these things where there's a whole set of unscientific. I think unscientific is generous, anti-scientific ideas about gender and what society can ask of any flavor of woman.
Yeah.
And they're all problematic, and they're all coming together in this little storm. In the sense that, like, let's say I don't know very many iGens or people who are under the age of 30 at all. But if a young woman came to me and said, "Should I use an app I'm having trouble with my menstrual process. I feel like it's a healthcare concern for me. Should I track that on an app and then show my doctor, when I had pain and when I didn't, in order to get the proper care?"
Right.
I think if this was 3 years ago, I would have said, you want to make sure you're not getting one of those menstrual apps that is selling your data. Right. And maybe you should just use a little spreadsheet on your phone or something.
Right.
But it is absolutely valuable in general for patients to track any part of their healthcare information on their devices, getting apps that, keep this stuff on their phones and just show their phones to their doctor. Like this. In general, 2 years ago, I would have been super positive about that. And if a woman did that today, I would say, you have some really hard choices to make. And I don't know what the right answer is. I can tell you a little bit about what the hard choices are.
Yeah.
If a woman came to you today and said that, knowing that you can't give her an answer because it's just so complicated, what would you say the main concerns that you feel like she should be informed about as she made that decision?
Yeah, I think, and I think some of these apps, apps that track fertility or menstrual cycles, I mean, the Dobbs decision really strikes at the heart of what is their bread and butter business, right? They want to collect this data in order to empower women to be able to seek better care, get the right kind of care. So I think a lot of them are sort of exploring what kinds of fortresses they can build around this data. So
the good ones.
Yeah.
The legit ones.
Yeah. So my advice would be to really, go deep into if you go to that company's website and you can't find a thing on there about Dobbs and how they protect the data from law enforcement and other access and what they do with the data in clear terms that you can understand, then I would say for sure, get a little spiral notebook, and write it down on paper.
Maybe don't even put your name on it.
Maybe don't even put your name on it. And that's because that's much safer than sort of taking on the uncertainty and the risk with a company that doesn't seem to have recognized that there's some real danger now to where this data could go. So I've always said, read privacy policies, read terms of service before you do something like this. Now, so that advice kind of gets underscored, because I do think there are some companies that are well aware of the risks and are trying very hard to try to meet those risks. Whether it goes far enough, I think is really going to be a personal decision for people to make. I know some people who have used fertility tracking apps, usually in an effort to try to get pregnant, and they found them enormously helpful.
Okay.
But they've, pretty much the people that I know who have used them have said, I don't think that I would be using them today. But again, the companies are, I think they're trying to respond, but if they don't have the right legal infrastructure to protect them and allow them to sort of make corporate decisions that provide more protection for the data, when faced with a law enforcement subpoena where they're going to get dragged into court and it's going to get compelled and there's not much they could do, there's the business response and then there's the reality. And that's what makes these choices so damn hard.
Yeah. So one of the things that we talked about, and Andrew Downing, unfortunately, couldn't make this conference. I think.
Bummer! I thought she was coming.
She was coming, and she had to bail out at the last minute.
Oh dear!
And we might try to actually have her on, or like remotely on the stream. But when we were looking at some of the Facebook stuff, we were talking about what it meant to have cyber hygiene, and I was talking about, is it one of the things that we kind of tossed out there was, is it important to teach people how to use encryption in their personal lives? And one of the things that it is surprisingly difficult to find a system that you can rely on to be available to you in 20 years.
Right.
That's a requirement that makes things really hard, like the way you want a medical record to be kind of permanently available.
Right.
The closest that I've found is using the encryption of a zip file using the 7-zip technology. And because there's two versions of encryption in a zip file. And the early one is easily hackable, but the later versions of the zip, I think, are AES, which is one of the good cryptographic algorithms. And zip files are kind of a standard, right? So it's like you could always zip something up, and so just keeping a text file in a 7-zip and using the version of encryption that comes with 7-zip is probably the easiest. And I can just say it on a stream like this, right? It's not complicated to say or articulate exactly what that is probably the digital equivalent of what you just said with a notebook. Just keep it
in a lockbox. Yeah.
Keep it in a lockbox, keep it on your laptop.
Yeah.
And you can have that as a digital resource and not do that. I do think it's really hard because there's two futures that are possible. And I don't know if an encrypted file on your laptop would be safer in an environment that becomes what I consider to be essentially fascist, or a notebook. And both of them are actually taking risks, right?
Sure.
And which is tragic. I mean, this is the kind of advice that I would expect, feels like very much a response to a near fascist type of thing. It's really sad that we're discussing
that way. Yeah, that we're even at this point. I think it there have been times when I've talked about some of the risks of jobs where I feel like I am being hyperbolic, but I know I'm not, right? Like in the sense of like, Devin, you've gone all conspiracy theory. This is like weird stuff, right? And yet I know that these things are possible. And the fact that they are possible and the lengths that the anti-choice movement will go to try to restrict those choices, we haven't seen the end of it, right? The Dobbs was not necessarily the last salvo. There will be more. There continue to be more.
Well,
it's attack after attack after attack after attack.
What I think is fascinating about,
so there's no limits to where they will go, which creates even more challenges to thinking through, like, how do we wiggle around this to make sure that women get the comprehensive healthcare that they deserve?
Well,
women. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, is that I think there's now a dozen different things that you can do wrong that or should be or were, as of 2 or 3 years ago, healthcare choices that you had the right to privacy to, which you no longer do, depending on your jurisdiction.
Right.
And I don't think it's a political thing to say that's a problem. Right. I try to.
It should be a problem.
No,
and the majority of the country thinks it's a problem.
No, absolutely. And it is. So I spend my time. I'm a healthcare data journalist. As a journalist, I am politically neutral. I am not a liberal or a conservative. That's my responsibility, is not to do that. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you're neutral on topics. And this is a classic example of a topic where, and I think this is the reason why healthcare researchers in general, people who work in healthcare, get a reputation for being liberal, is that the liberal position ends up being the only ethical one. Right? I mean, I think that's a fair way to say it, is that you have to, you can't, because what we're discussing here is, and I think we're probably not done with the discussion of what you think should be done about how healthcare information exchange in general needs to respond to this, because what we're talking about is information that is critical to, and I think it's, your status, your menstrual status, your pregnancy status, your gender status. All of these are part of your healthcare record that really need to be part of your healthcare record in order to handle emergency care, in order to handle coordination of care.
Yeah.
These things need to be there. And we have built a liquidity into the healthcare system. And we both, in different ways, have been contributing to that liquidity for a long time.
I still feel like it's super important.
It's super important. And now I don't think we were wrong.
No, we're not.
To take the positions that we have in the past, but I think we do need to start thinking about like what kind of advice we give. I think maybe my advice, for instance, I think your advice about, here's the reason why I think it's even worth talking about the zip file, because I actually think your idea of the notepad, is probably right. Let me just endorse that. Let me endorse that idea that notepad is probably right. However, if you're downloading your blue button data and you're getting a file or something else, how do you keep that? Well, are people going to print that out or something and delete it? So I actually think maybe what I should do.
It's also just for, we can only protect it for personal use. The minute you share it with somebody, which is always where the value proposition is, then that no matter what you've done to protect it in your own possession, it's gone out the door.
Sure. So I think maybe what I should do is write up a little guide about how to use a USB stick that you can take to your provider with an encrypted zip file that you can reliably get things in and out of, but you can give the password or not give the password, which is an embarrassment, frankly, from all the work that we've done to try to make it so you did not have to use a USB stick to take your medical records around.
Right.
We're working to get that to not be the case for years. But I think maybe, and in the comments, please, I mean, this is going to be on Twitter, it's going to be on YouTube. If that's something that you would welcome from me, I can write that guide and I will do that. What do you think you might do to try to contribute to this problem? Do you have any ideas or things that you're going to be involved with? Is there anything that people can do? I mean, besides voting differently, which,
voting like this matters, because it does.
If you're listening, A, whether or not you vote really matters. B, how you vote really matters. And C, look at the unintended consequences. And please do look up, what is it? Panther ate my face party? Because I feel like that's what we're talking. You heard of that? The meme? So it's a meme online where it's just like, oh, I don't know how this bad thing happened to me, but I'm a member of the Panthers Eat My Face party. And so that's the reason why you have this problem, is because you're a member of that party.
Okay.
So I apologize.
That's interesting. So here is what I'm doing. If I have any smarts or talents at all, it's in trying to think through policy issues. So I think for sure we need better protections for this data. We have HIPAA, but it's got lots of law enforcement loopholes. We've got Congress considering privacy legislation and coming closer than they have in years, but it probably still also has too many law enforcement loopholes. Like, I think we really need a conversation about why, when we think about law enforcement needs to data, we just kind of capitulate and say, well, if law enforcement needs it, without placing a few more boundaries around when that is necessary or makes sense. Because the trade-off to that, it's not like, with all due respect to people in law enforcement, we need them, and law, and there still is sometimes when delivery of care is a legitimate crime, like criminal malpractice, things of that nature, where yes, we would need medical records to prosecute that crime. Somebody commits a crime on a medical facility that it doesn't involve delivery of reproductive health care, you're going to want to be able to prosecute that crime. But let's define the circumstances where it's justifiable for law enforcement to have access in a way that does less damage to people's ability to seek care for stigmatized conditions. Because we went through this in the HIV epidemic, right? Where and the consequence of those of laws that allow law enforcement to have very easy access to data is that you have you've made a trade-off already and decided that it doesn't matter the extent to which that creates constraints around people's seeking and getting healthcare that is medically necessary, medically recommended, and medically legal in the place where they get it. And yet we've just sort of made a decision from a policy standpoint more often than not that if law enforcement wants that data, they can get it. And without, even if they were required to go to a neutral arbiter like a court in order to get a court order, that would be better than the circumstance that we have today. It's not perfect because we all know we know who sits in those judge spots and how they get there and how that can all play out. But it's certainly better than where we are, which is, and these battles get fought actually within the walls of government because we have HHS and Justice Department in the same government, and they do battle each other over stuff like this. This happened when HIPAA was first getting promulgated. There were knockdown, drag-out fights between the Justice Department and HHS over certain provisions in HIPAA, and it's probably one of the reasons why HIPAA's law enforcement provisions are what they are, is that there were fights in the federal government. You can't get a rule out without clearance. It's what sometimes takes policy so long to happen in the federal government, is that there's all these different interests in the federal government that have to weigh in on what's happening at HHS. And so while HHS might be inclined to kind of close ranks around and constrain law enforcement, they're going to have to get that through the Justice Department.
So one of the things that I've noticed is, over time, that when there is institutionalized injustice, and it becomes so pervasive that everyone knows, right? And I think it's a real problem when when a group is experiencing something and only they know that it's a problem. And
only they know that it's a problem, or people don't accept their story.
Right. But one of the wonderful thing about the internet is that it's more difficult to do that now. Right?
Yeah.
Because stories get out.
Yep.
So that's one good thing about how technology has changed that. But in finance, cryptocurrencies, whatever you think of them, are a criticism and a way to say, we're just going to create a technology infrastructure that disallows a particular brand of shenanigans.
Right.
And signal and encrypted communications are another essentially way to have. We need to be able to communicate without having supervision. That's a lot closer to the kind of things that we're talking about.
Right.
Encrypted zip files are close. Do you think there is going to become a technology layer, which is, things like, I can imagine just an app who has no other purpose than to be the encrypted record of your reproductive health? Not just when you need, you can imagine like a PHR, I'm just imagining now, a personal health record. It's on your phone. You pay maybe $10 for, right? Because you can't have these things have business models of selling data. So you pay $10 to get the app, you download it to your phone. It does reproductive health PHR. That's all it does. And you can get it when you're 12, right? Your first menstruation, you download this thing and you start using it to record all of your stuff so that that's always just separate from your health record. Do you see that happening? Do you see that as valuable? I mean, because there's a time element too. Unless we fix this as a system, like unless somebody listens to what you just said from a policy recommendation perspective, or listens to me when I go in and say, we have to figure out how to not transfer necessarily all the things or restrict things or change the way fire works. Unless the institutions can get a little more balance, eventually someone's going to code a way around this, and it will become popular, and the people will, and then we'll just essentially
And law enforcement will seek a backdoor to it.
Exactly.
And Congress will have to decide whether
they're going to do it. Right.
Yeah.
But then it's like, well, and of course, I don't know if you follow the EFF and some of the things they talk about general computing, but
sure.
There's a certain point where it's like, well, ultimately, whether or not you can completely program your computer ends up being whether or not you have this particular civil right, which is going to be a fascinating discussion. But just pontificate for a second. What do you see happening here? Because
because on some level, people will get creative about this. That's that is the notion of a somewhat free society, right? And as the people are enterprising and we'll try to think of ways, and then we'll continue to have these conversations about whether there are backdoors to it. I mean, it sort of reminds me of the the whole post-Snowden era conversations around protecting his communications and encryption of those communications, and whether some of the telecom companies that created law enforcement backdoors should have or shouldn't have. And I mean, this is just similar set of issues, just with a healthcare spin on it that wasn't present in some of those other conversations. So people will get creative. I still struggle with how that solves the problem of what happens the first time you share it out of that protected enclave into a space that isn't protected for a completely legitimate need, right? I'm applying for life insurance. I have to give somebody access to my medical records. I do it. Now suddenly it's in the hands of the life insurance company that's not using this tech, right? And, but I don't want to create a barrier to some creative thinking, because I don't have a good solution here. If I did, I mean, I think about how to resolve this from a policy standpoint, but the mountain is hard to climb. Like there's a lot, notwithstanding where most of the country appears to be based on polling data, how this is playing out from a policy standpoint is completely opposite to what the majority of people think. And yet we don't see that necessarily changing from a policy standpoint. So getting this fixed from a policy standpoint, which is where my orientation is, hard. Getting it fixed from a tech standpoint with some of that creativity, I definitely don't want to say anything that would discourage somebody from going down that road, honestly, because we don't have good answers.
Yeah, because policy is hard when politics is broken.
Yeah.
And we're definitely at that place.
Yeah, absolutely. So get on it.
So let's be regarded as my problem. Well, listen, I mean, I think this is an interesting conversation. I wanted to thank Devin, so generous with her time, and also this conversation is absolutely within the spirit of what Datapalooza is. It's trying to figure out what to do with data, and I want to say, I can think of my father. My father actually believes that because he believes that God has told him, when a fetus is alive, and therefore he thinks of it as murder. There are people who disagree with the underlying context here, but the idea that one group of people gets to enforce what they and use the law against people who disagree with their position is pretty problematic. And part of the federation of states that we are as the United States is that we should be able to say, if your state has made decisions like this, then people have the freedom to leave your state and go somewhere else. And that this notion of crossing state lines with your ideology, for those who are conservative who are listening, like my father, just remember that, there's no reason why that kind of policy can't work in the other direction, where your beliefs and the things you cherish and the way you want to live is then invaded by people from the outside. So, we live in a federation for a reason. We have a states that are competitions for ideas. I do think that there is something about the federal courts being the place where we have consensus precedent that I think has been violated here too. I think that the fact that it was overturned at all is somewhat problematic, but it was overturned. So, I don't know what to say, but I don't know if you've read a book. I can't remember the name, and I'll get it to you. But it's basically making the case. And stream, I'll find the book, and on my next stream I'll say it out. But it's essentially saying that conservative people have an additional moral sense that they are that they're interested in something that I think liberal people, and I don't actually consider myself a liberal person. I try to consider myself a scientist, but trying not to be either one of those things. But they think about the world differently, and that makes and the way they think about the world is legitimate. I do not think that the Republican Party is reflective of that conservative position. I think the majority of the people, including my father, who are conservative, are not well served by the Republican Party currently, because I probably say the same thing about liberals and the Democratic Party. So that's not wonderful. But so I just want to say I am trying not to take a political position here. I don't think you are either.
No.
We're just talking about
the impact.
We're talking about the impact and the
ability of health data to flow where it needs to
in order for people to get proper care.
In order for people to get proper lawful care in the places where they are able to do that.
That's right.
That's all.
And so I'm not trying to kind of stir a political pot. I do think that what I like about Datapalooza is that this is the kind of place where if you are a conservative, if you are a liberal, even if you are a Republican or a Democrat, which, it's not the same things, those two, the first things at all, you can come here and you can have a conversation that's respectful and is deep and is interesting, and where we're going to hash out and talk about the implications of these really complicated policy issues and the way that data interacts. And we literally just had a conversation where Devin's thinking as a lawyer, I'm thinking as a technologist. We're trying to figure out whose problem is this. And I don't think this conversation happens other places in the same way. So that's why I come to Datapalooza. That's why we stream from Datapalooza. That's why you speak at Datapalooza.
Love Datapalooza.
That's why we both work near Academy Health, is because they support these kinds of kind of hard questions. I hope we've done a good job asking them. Do you think we've done a good job asking them in this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. Do you have anything else you want to say? Otherwise, I'll press the button and end the stream.
No, thanks for the opportunity, Fred. I appreciate it and appreciate all of you.
Yes. And virtually or in person, I'll see you at some future Datapalooza. So, bye-bye.